Welcome to tonight's live stream. I'm going to get started in a minute. Sorry about the delay, but there was something going on in my apartment and I had to take care of it. So what's going on, Gordon Freeman? What's going on, Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare? Great to see you here. What's going on, Kyle Cray? What's going on, D Woodward 78? I'm sorry for being late, but there were some issues in my apartment I had to take care of. So I had a 10-minute delay for tonight's show. But before I get started with discussing tonight's topic, I want to go out here and put in a link for Chris Brown's Omega Black Indiegogo because he's 52% there. And if we all put in our pledges, we can help Chris get funded. And Chris really wants to see this get funded. I want to see this get funded because this is a project I have been working on as an editor. So I'm asking everybody to put in their pledge by clicking a link in the chat or put in the link for Omega Black Indiegogo. So I'm asking everybody to please go out here and support this awesome African American manga. It presents a positive image of Black men and Black women, and you're supporting a Black creator and helping him get positive images of Black people out here. And with that, I also want to ask everybody to head over to Amazon to pick up a product everybody has day, practically doing the page layouts for this book. And this book is the very popular Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. Now, this book has helped so many Black men out here get their lives in order, and it's helped many Black women understand why they are single. So people have been asking me to put together a paperback version of Why 70%. But I chose not to put it out as a paperback because out of fear that a lot of Black men would wind up in trouble with Black women once they read this book. It's just like what David Carroll used to say about you watching the rabbit hole videos. If you watch those videos and there's a Black woman in the room, she sees it on your phone or she sees it on your computer screen, you're going to get into a fight. And that's what I fear about the Why 70% of Black Women Are on Paperback. But I've made this paperback available because brothers have asked for it, and now it's available. And I hope you all go out and please pick up the paperback that you guys asked for. D Woodward 78. I think I'm going to do a video on what Joe Biden said next week. I really want to digest it and really look at some articles and do some research. But I'm planning on doing a whole video on what Joe Biden said and what his whole vision for Black people is, because he's really coming across as condescending and paternalistic. Now, tonight's topic comes from one of my Facebook friends, J.M. McSwain, and he was talking about what was going on as related to the evictions going on in Florida, and a article a brother sent me regarding the New York Post. And there's both of these articles kind of correlate with each other, and they really show me how the man crisis is affecting this whole COVID-19 pandemic and how it is being handled. Because if you look at the individual events on their own as isolated incidents, you won't see how they actually are connected. But when you take that panoramic perspective and you really take a critical examination of these events, you will really start to see what this is, how this all connects to the man crisis. Because in my book, The Man Crisis, I talked about how your beta male, when he's out here and he's in a leadership position, he just can't handle it. And that's what I'm seeing with the way this whole COVID-19 pandemic is being handled. The big problem is we see these symptoms, which is like the inability to get people their unemployment, the inability to deal with these evictions. This is a problem we have as related to leadership. And the big problem we've had here in New York City is the fact that we have a beta male in charge. Now, these beta males, when you give them positions of power, they don't know how they like having the position and the title, but they aren't really good at taking responsibility. And when I look at the way this pandemic has been completely mishandled, it fits right in line with that pattern and profile I talk about with beta males and their inability to go out here and take responsibility. Because with your beta male, everything is about his feelings. And because he's in his feelings, he cannot think critically about taking care of the needs of we the people. Now, what the big problem is with many of these beta males in Washington and these beta male mayors and governors is they are so in their feelings about Donald Trump that they can't think critically about how to navigate and set a course for this pandemic. Because this pandemic is being made worse by these beta male leaders because they are so caught up in their emotions about Donald Trump that they're not thinking with an objective mindset. They only want to go out here and top Donald Trump, and that's putting American lives at risk. Because with this COVID-19 pandemic going on and people dying every day, most of these people who are supposed to be our representatives and our leaders, they are so caught up in their emotions about Donald Trump that they can't really sit down and say, I need to set a course to take care of the people in my city, my state, and my congressional districts, these people I'm representing. Everything is no longer about serving we the people. It is all about getting even with Donald Trump. And I could see this pattern starting to emerge back in March. And now I'm seeing this pattern solidifying when I look at many of the decisions that were made by people like your mayor, Bill de Blasio. Now, your mayor, Bill de Blasio, here in New York, he decided that he was going to house homeless men in hotels on Manhattan's Upper West Side in an effort to combat the pandemic. Unfortunately, your mayor, Bill de Blasio, didn't look at the big picture as related to the community, and he didn't think about the long-term ramifications and consequences as related to the whole quality of life in the city. He was so caught up in his emotions about the fear and the panic of the pandemic, one, and two, caught up in his feelings about Donald Trump, that he did not think critically about the quality of life in those areas like the Upper West Side. Now, the Upper West Side is some of the most priciest real estate in New York City, and the quality of life has gotten so bad there that the Upper West Side is now looking a lot like the South Bronx, with lots of homeless men congregating, and a lot of these men urinating, masturbating, and even defecating on the street, and some are terrorizing people on the street. Now, the New York Post article I read wanted to make this about black men because the image was primarily black men out there, but I could see past this effort to demonize black men and the image of black men, and I could see the bigger picture as related to that article, because I could see the racist slant being presented on this whole issue of the Upper West Side being in such a bad state. And you have to look at the New Upper West Side as one problem, as one symptom of the bigger problem in America's man crisis. Because the man crisis here in America is one of the greatest problems, I believe, of the 21st century. And because we don't have men running things, we are making situations where the country is going to be in a worse state than it was 100 years ago. Because if you do not have men who have a good, solid foundation of male life skills and male survival skills, then you're not going to have men with the right mindset to know how to navigate a course in a crisis. And we see this right now going on with the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of these males are just not mentally equipped to navigate a course as related to dealing with this pandemic. And because these males do not really have the mental acuity to navigate a course, what happens is you get chaos like we see starting to transpire on the streets of here in New York City, places like Portland, and places like Seattle, because the males there do not know how to set a sense of structure. These males do not know how to lay out an agenda, and these males do not know how to set goals for what they hope to accomplish, because this is not part of how the beta male learned how to deal with things in life. Because most of your beta males, either they grew up in households with single mothers, or they grew up in households with soft, weak beta male fathers who did not teach them how to use things like critical thinking and logic and reason. And because these individuals did not learn how to use those types of thinking processes, they don't know how to deal with conflict. And this is the big problem with putting a beta male in charge of anything. When you put a beta male in charge of something, he does not know how to deal with conflict. And if you're going to go out here and build any sort of infrastructure or maintain any, or manage and maintain any sort of community or business, you really need to know how to deal with conflict. And you have to get over things like people being confrontational, people being argumentative, and you have to know how to really deal with all of the aspects of conflict. But your beta males don't know how to deal with conflict. Whenever they deal with conflict, they act just like these single mothers out here and these females. And what they do is several coping skills I go in depth talking about in the Man Crisis. Now, in the Man Crisis, I talk about how these females, what they do when they're put under pressure, they wind up either lying about things and denying that they happen, or what they do is they tune out what you're saying, or they wind up shutting down. And if we look at many of our mayors, many of our governors, and even parts our own president and some of the Congress and the Senate, we're starting to see them participating in many of these behaviors where they wind up going out here and tuning out information they don't want to hear, denying that there are problems, and going out and practically shutting down. And that just shows me how deep the damage is from these boys being raised to be beta males, and the fact that we have a large female population representing in leadership roles. And because we have the combination of the two, we really can't get a good handle on this COVID-19 pandemic, and things just keep spiraling out of control because one of the big problems with your beta males is, again, the core foundation is they cannot deal with conflict. And when you put a beta male in a leadership position, again, what happens is he winds up falling completely apart. And when he falls apart, everything falls apart around him. Thank you, Information Man Show, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Nick Ooh, for the super chat from Canada. Glad to see you here from Canada. I would love to do Manosphere panels, but it's just too dysfunctional over there. I mean, I'll do one-on-one interviews if I get invited, but I avoid the panels because after the whole passport thing, there is no real civility, and there's just too much dysfunction over there. So I would love to do more types of interviews and stuff, but I just can't deal with that dysfunction. Gordon Freeman, yeah, I can say that. I can agree with that at some points because it's just too much dysfunction in the pattern of his behavior. And thank you, Yak Diesel, for the super chat. If the mayor wanted to make a difference, yeah, he would have prosecuted Daniel Pantaleo. And yeah, that and Barack Obama dealing with Zimmerman would have prevented a George Floyd. And these beta male leaders, like Yak Diesel is saying, yeah, they're concerned with symbolism and instead of rolling up their sleeves, because these men don't know how to problem solve. This is a big problem with the beta male. He looks at superficial exterior things as accomplishing something, but in actuality, he has accomplished nothing because his whole world, you have to understand, is rose-colored. And when I look at guys like your Bill de Blasio, their world is rose-colored. They don't see the reality being presented to them. They live in a blue pill world, and they live in a world of ideals. They don't live in the real world. And like my Facebook friend J.M. McSwain talked about on his Facebook post, we have a very serious crisis going on here. And these beta males are so busy bickering back and forth, they can't understand how dire the situation is and how much worse they're making things by going out here and denying how serious the problem is. Because after we have 50% of the country unemployed, and we have a eviction moratorium getting ready to expire. And many of these same people said we had to flatten the curve back in March. And what they don't understand is their inaction is going to lead to a further spike of the virus. Because if we do not do anything about this tidal wave of evictions, what's going to happen is you're going to have an explosion of COVID-19 in these United States. Because if we have almost 50 million people at risk of losing their apartments in evictions, and many more possibly could lose their homes in foreclosure. What's going to happen is we're going to have a flood of homeless people. And when you have this flood of homeless people, you're going to have a complete economic collapse because all of these people are going to be out on the street, and all of these people are going to be out here with no protections and no way of paying taxes. And this is going to cause a domino effect because if you don't have citizens paying taxes, then you have no money for municipal services, and you have no money to pay for municipal services like roads, transit, and especially hospitals. So all of these things are interconnected, but because these people are so in their feelings about Donald Trump, they can't think critically about how all of these things work together. They're still caught up in the high apple pie in the sky theory from Dr. Anthony Fauci, talking about how they're going to flatten the curve, but the curve was already flattened and the theory already disproven. So anybody with common sense and critical thinking would have told you that once you had flattened this curve and let people back out, those people were going to be vulnerable because their immune systems were already weakened by being at home. And many who wore masks outside, their immune systems were going to be weakened. So those people were going to be more vulnerable to the virus. And that's why we're having all of these spikes across the country. It's not about people going to bars. The lockdowns themselves were fundamentally flawed. And nobody wants to admit this because, again, another beta male trait is just denying problems. And another beta male trait is hiding the evidence. And the hiding the evidence is another problem we're having because the beta male, that's the reason why we can't get any sort of consistent statistics outside of deaths as related to COVID-19, is because the beta male wants to deny that these numbers are true. They don't want to acknowledge the problems with these numbers, and they don't want to acknowledge the factual hard truths. So they just keep flipping and flopping, and that flipping and flopping makes it hard for anyone to get consistent data as related to how many people have been infected with this virus, how many people have died from this virus, and how many people have recovered from this virus. Because you have beta males in leadership positions, and beta males don't want to be responsible, just like the females don't want to be responsible for any bad news, because bad news disrupts their smooth world, or in some cases for the media, they need that bad news in order to have their smooth world. What happens is we get all of this chaos going on as related to the data. And that's one of the most frustrating things when you have a beta male in charge, is you can't get any sort of consistency as related to the way they present information. And it's very, very frustrating to deal with them because just when you get one story from them, they'll change the story. And this is what some people call moving the goalpost. And that's another thing that they do. And that it's all related to them not wanting to acknowledge any sort of mistakes or flaws that they make. Now, another thing that beta males like to do is move the goalpost. And we saw that happen after the numbers started to decline as related to the lockdown theory. We saw the numbers start to go down, and then we started to see people opening stuff back up. And once they started opening stuff back up and people wanted to get on with their lives, all of a sudden we started seeing people go from flatten the curve to more different types of goals. And this is another beta male trait. Another beta male trait is moving the goalpost. And moving the goalpost is something that is extremely frustrating for people to deal with, because when you move the goalpost, you don't have a measure of how you're progressing, and you don't have a measure to measure what standards were met as related to whatever you're trying to accomplish. And this is why whenever you put a beta male in charge of things, things really turn into chaos, because instead of him looking to finish whatever goal he set, what happens is he starts moving the goalpost, and we never get any sort of measure to know where we are at a certain point, and we never get to see things finish. And the reason why we don't get to see things finish is because when you're dealing with a beta male, he is afraid of any sort of criticism, and he's afraid of any sort of commentary made that's derogatory against him. And because he's so scared of criticism, he just keeps moving the goalpost, and he moves the goalpost to avoid having to deal again with the conflict as related to criticism and to dealing with the commentary being made that will actually say negative things about him. But any sort of man out here understands that criticism is a good thing. And yeah, what happens is when people criticize you, excuse me, had a little gas. When people are criticizing you, it's not a bad thing. It is that person is showing how much they care about you. And that criticism is meant to point out issues you need to work on, areas you need to improve, and things you need to work on. And when you're having a pandemic and people's lives are on the line, you have to be able to listen to people who are criticizing you. And this is a big problem with people on the left and the right, and that is exacerbating the whole pandemic, is you have people who can't take criticism on either side. And whenever you present them with criticism as related to their actions, what happens is they start to get emotional, they start to take things personal, and they start to sometimes escalate into drama and histrionics. And it's really sad to see leaders doing this during a major crisis, seeing leaders practically showing us that they don't have any sort of mettle, they don't have any sort of resolve, and even worse, their minds aren't in the right place. Because what's really troubling is when you have a beta male in charge, his mind is the one thing that needs to be in the right place, because in order to be a leader, you have to have your head in the game. And sadly, your beta male's head is just not in the game, because he just has not been taught, one, those male life skills and survival skills, and two, he is so caught up in his emotions that he cannot really sit down and take a minute to pull back and look at things objectively. And that's another big problem with your beta male, is he does not think objectively. Everything is based on subjective opinion. And we can see that from the way these politicians have been talking, the way the news media has been talking, and the way a lot of people out here have been talking about this pandemic. Everything is based on opinions, not on hard facts. And everything is based on feelings, not facts. Yeah, thank you, Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare. Yeah, we should get the likes up. We have 47 people in the stream and 23 likes. Let's get the likes up. And if you want to donate to the Cash App to help me make more live streams, you can click the link in the chat. So thank you very much, Nightingale Wednesday Nightmare, for helping me out here. Let's get those likes up. And I'm going to keep going on, because I look at this whole, again, beta male leadership, and this is something that has been coming for 50 years. And what we're seeing, again, is like what I talked about in the man crisis. This has been coming for 50 years after all the feminist movement and the social engineering of the beta male. These beta males have now grown up and now they are adults. And as adults, they have been put in positions of power. Unfortunately, when you put a beta male in a position of power, he just is not ready to take on the responsibility because he's a short-term thinker. And that short-term thinking is what we saw happen from March to right now with the mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic and why it's a complete failure. Now, some people will sit there and blame Donald Trump for everything. And when I look at this whole situation from a panoramic critical perspective, I cannot blame just Donald Trump for the way America is right now. I can't blame him for all of this, no, because when you look at our United States Constitution, in the 10th Amendment, it clearly states that the governors were given power over the states, and it was the governors who ultimately made the decision to shut down all of the so-called non-essential businesses in an effort to control the pandemic. And that had a ripple effect on the overall United States economy. Moreover, it had an overall ripple effect on the American households, which led to 50 million people, or half the country practically, being unemployed. And because these beta male leaders and female leaders could not connect the dots and see how America's economic system worked, they could not understand the long-term damage they were doing in order to flatten a short-term curve. Now, they went with a theory from Dr. Anthony Fauci without vetting it with critical thinking based on, oh, if we flatten this curve and keep the hospitals from being overwhelmed, it'll be okay, not understanding that the hospitals run on tax dollars, because they were trying to compare U.S.'s economic system to China's, not understanding the People's Republic of China is a communist country, and if they shut down, they have resources allocated to take care of their people. In America, we are a capitalist system, and as a capitalist system, everything is run by we the people, and the economic system is primarily run by local small businesses. I mean, 60 to 70% of America's economy runs on small businesses, and I believe we have done so much damage to those small businesses that many may never recover. And that's the really saddest part about this. We destroyed millions of small businesses, which were the foundation of America's economy, for a short-term gain. And then once those businesses tried to reopen, we started to see these numbers start to go back up because of this theory that was already fundamentally flawed. As I saw it, like way back in March, I said, if you close all the businesses and put people inside of their homes, what's going to happen is once those people come out, they're going to wind up with their immune systems weakened, and because they're inside most of the time and they're not building up a natural immunity, what's going to happen is they're going to come back out and they're going to wind up getting infected with the virus. So this is what happened as related to many of the areas we're seeing spikes right now, because your Dr. Fauci didn't really think about his theory in an overall panoramic perspective or a big picture. He was like, I want to flatten the curve. And flattening the curve, yes, was a short-term thing, but it did long-term damage, and it's going to do further long-term damage to the economy, because when you have half the country out of work, what happens is you've actually hindered the country even further, because if there are no taxpayers paying taxes, then the states run on deficits, which some, like New York, were already on. And you then have more it problems. And on top of it, with the moratorium on rent expiring and evictions and foreclosures expiring, you now have a housing crisis in addition to a COVID crisis. And if you don't deal with the housing crisis in addition to the COVID crisis, what's going to happen is you're going to further spread COVID-19, because when you have homeless people in the streets and there's a whole bunch of them there's not going to be any sort of social distancing, and this is going to lead to further spread of disease. Moreover, you're not going to have money to pay doctors at the hospitals, and the hospitals which barely will remain operational are going to wind up overwhelmed. And your beta male leaders, they only thought about a short-term goal of flattening the curve without understanding the longer term, bigger picture as related to the economy and the nation's overall health. For many of these beta males, it was all about Trump, Trump, Trump. And we need to stop thinking about Trump, because this emotional outburst about Trump that people have, this grudge that many people have against Donald Trump, is hurting the entire nation. And as an American, I look at that and it's really sad, because we should be thinking about taking care of the country, not our feelings about an individual. We should be thinking about making sure that our American people are taken care of. And that's not being done because so many people are so caught up in their feelings about Donald Trump. And you have people on either side, the left and the right, using him as a bludgeon or an excuse for what's going on. And that's not what a man does, and that's not what a woman does. A man takes responsibility and says, look, we have this pandemic going on. We need to take care of things that need to be taken care of. And we need to set aside our feelings about each other to take care of an important common goal. And that common goal should have been about dealing with the virus from a panoramic perspective. I believe we should have had a focus on triage as related to dealing with COVID-19. And in triage, you take care of the most sickest people first, the other people second, and the others third. And I really believe that's the approach that should have been used, is triage, in addition to making sure that American businesses stayed in business and doing things like creating enhanced Medicare and Medicaid so people could get their medical needs taken care of, and giving people, the days off if they're sick, because some of these NPC employers out here, they would practically bully people if they didn't go to work and stuff like that. We needed protections like that, but no one wants to do that when you have a beta male leader, because a beta male leader, another problem that they have is they just don't know how to compromise. And beta males, they have to have it their way or the highway. And we can see that with the impasse we have over the unemployment benefits that Americans have that are expiring. I mean, the $600 credit was supposed to help Americans during this pandemic. Americans who were not at fault, and business owners who were not at fault when they were told to shut down by these governors and these mayors. They are being punished by these politicians who still have their axe to grind with Donald Trump. And we don't need people to be having an axe to grind when you have almost half of the country unemployed and half the country on the brink of losing their apartments and their homes. I mean, here we have a crisis that's getting worse. And because you have beta males in their feelings and females in their feelings about a man, they're not thinking about the needs of we the people. And that is one of the most troubling things I have seen from many of these politicians. They only think about themselves. and they don't think about the people who they're representing and the people they're putting at risk. And that really shows how little many of these people actually care. It's all about getting Donald Trump, and it should not be about getting Donald Trump. It should not be about, I want to make Donald Trump pay, because if you're so caught up in somebody personally, that means you're not thinking about yourself, because that's another trait that beta males have, is that beta males, they always put themselves second. And when I look at the failure of beta male leadership as related to this pandemic, it just shows how they're putting Donald Trump first, and it shows how weak the leadership is, because when you put somebody before you, you are deifying that person. And when you deify that person, you are saying they have a higher value than you do. And when I look at the way people are acting, I'm like, you're putting this man on a pedestal, because every news media report you make is about him. Everything about the pandemic is about him. It's not about helping people get better. It's about trying to hurt this guy. And that reminds me a lot of how many of these beta males, when they're out here, whenever they see a girl they like, what happens is, or a guy who's doing better than they are, what happens is they see that girl who's doing better with a guy that they let me clarify. When they see a girl that they like with another guy, or they see a guy doing better than they are, what happens is the beta male gets jealous. He just focuses on that person like a laser, and he goes out here trying to convince everybody that the girl that is dating the wrong guy. He makes the guy out to be a demon. And what he does is, when he does that, he deifies the guy, and he makes people see his value more than himself. And when he goes out here and he sees a guy with success, he's driving a nice car, wearing nice clothes, and he's always hating on that guy, what happens is people start to look at that other guy and they start to see, oh, this guy looks pretty good. This guy, he's really fly, because you keep talking about this guy, putting him on a pedestal. And while you're doing that, you make yourself look even weaker, and you elevate this person. And this is what I'm seeing with beta male leaders. They're just so caught up in Donald Trump that they're elevating him to a higher status and inflating his value, not understanding that if you have these criticisms and you go at him like this, you're making him stronger. And that's one of the points I tried to make in numerous videos. I said, when you talk about this guy and you make him out to be the bad guy, it's just like the thug or the biker boyfriend. You're putting so much emphasis on him, you're making him out to be the hero, and you're making yourself look like a villain. And this is one of the things that beta males do. And again, this type of approach really isn't really productive as related to the pandemic. And again, shows the weakness of beta male leadership, because when you have a beta male leader in charge, they go out here and they're so busy following that they don't see how weak they're made as a leader. And I'm seeing this again from both sides, just weak leadership and no focus on an agenda, no focus on goals, no direction whatsoever. And that's something I saw in numerous episodes of Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares, and Hotel Hell. And in all of those episodes of those shows, Kitchen Nightmares, Hotel Hell, and now Gordon Ramsay's 24 Hours to Hell and Back, he shows how these businesses wind up struggling because these beta male leaders just refuse to go out here and confront conflict, solve problems, or go out here and even acknowledge problems. For them, they live in a world of denial, and they don't want to take responsibility. Now, your beta male, he loves all of the glory, but he doesn't have the guts or the tenacity to hang in there and persevere in the face of a struggle. Because when you have a beta male and you put him in a leadership position, he starts immediately looking to pass his responsibilities off on somebody else. And a lot of times, your beta male will look to pass his responsibilities off either on a female who he makes to be his surrogate mother, or he looks to pass it off on some other male and make that male the one who he can go out here and turn into the scapegoat for why things are messing up. And I talk about that in Stop Simping in the Workplace. The beta male will sit there and he just will sit there and say, it's whenever something's going wrong, it's somebody else's fault. It's never his fault. And when you start blaming people, that's a sign of weak leadership, because a leader has to sit there and say, look, I took charge of this. I'm responsible for this. This is under my charge. And since it's under my charge, I have to acknowledge if we're going wrong, if things aren't working out. I have to say, look, this is on me, and this is not what I'm seeing with the handling of things. And again, it shows me the textbook beta male leadership, because beta male leaders, they never want to take any sort of responsibility for what's going on. They always tune out negative information. They deny problems are going on. And then when there are problems arising and they have evidence of it, they hide the evidence, they shred the evidence, and they throw the evidence in the trash because it's not fitting their narratives rather on things. Jay, you can pick up The Man Crisis on Amazon.com in paperback or Kindle formats. So I'm going to leave a link to it in the chat. Get The Man Crisis here. And left the link in the chat so you can pick that up there. And this is a big problem, because this is a problem, as I see it, that's 50 years in the making. Because some people will say, oh, these guys like Donald Trump are 70, but I look at guys like Bill de Blasio, the mayor of Portland, and the mayor of Minneapolis, who I'm going to go into right now. And the mayor of Minneapolis, when he was confronted, I mean, even before he was confronted about George Floyd, he was showing me beta male characteristics. I mean, I saw the slouched body language. I saw the head down. I saw the eyes not making eye contact. And I was looking at it, I was like, this is a beta male. And sure enough, the reason why everything exploded in Minneapolis the way it did was due to his ineffective leadership. He did not look to bring the city together in the crisis. He just let the crisis get out of control regarding George Floyd, and the other people there let it get out of control because they all just wanted to avoid dealing with the conflict of the rioters. So that was also showing us how beta males deal with conflict. When I looked at that situation, I was like, this whole situation needed to be contained, but because these guys were so afraid of conflict, the whole situation wound up deteriorating and practically turning into this explosive riot. Because when you're dealing with, again, with a beta male, his first instinct isn't to confront the conflict. His first instinct is to hide from the conflict and avoid the conflict, because he's basically a coward at heart. And beta males can't deal with leadership situations where there's a crisis involved. And we saw that again with the Minneapolis murder of George Floyd. Practically a lot of wishy-washy, flip-flopping beta males, from the mayor to the prosecutor to the attorney general. They did not want to confront the problem. they wanted to keep passing the buck on the problem. And again, that just is a symptom of the man crisis in politics. And we have a major man crisis going on in politics. And that man crisis is causing this pandemic to turn into the chaotic situation that it is. Because the reason why you have all of this chaos going on is because you have beta males in charge, and beta males, when they get put in charge, their coping skills prevent them from being able to take any sort of responsibility. Just like the single moms and the beta male dads who raise them, what happens with a beta male is he winds up tuning out information, he winds up shutting down, and he winds up denying what's going on. And he goes for high apple pie in the sky fantasies, not dealing with the realities of what's going on. And oftentimes, when you're dealing with a beta male, he won't look at the solutions that are in front of him, because oftentimes he doesn't want to look at those solutions because he's afraid of being embarrassed or being made to look bad, because everything is about his appearance and not about solving the problem. Everything is about how he looks, and you can't be about what you're looking at when you're a leader. It's about what needs to be done. Jay Stevens asks, how do I feel about beta males and simps that cause 40 million people to be unemployed in America? Well, I'm really saddened by this because, again, it shows us how deep the man crisis is in this country, and it shouldn't have gone that way. I believe we could have kept all of those small businesses open, because what would have actually been a positive, because people's immune systems would have been up, and I believe it would have led to the spread of less virus in the country. But these guys went on a theory based on feelings without vetting that theory. And sadly, we are in a worse situation now than we were back in March. And that's all because all of these beta males and some of these females were so caught up in their emotions about Donald Trump. And they were also caught up in their fear about this virus. And again, it just shows how Americans don't really understand why it's important to have the right people in leadership positions, and why you just can't take it for granted on who you elect as your congressperson, your senator, your mayor, your representatives, because if these people are not in a good critical thinking framework or mindset, they're going to make bad decisions that impact everyone across the country. Because the only state that I see that's in good shape is South Dakota, and that governor, who was a woman, didn't close anything, and they're in far better shape than the rest of the country, because she didn't buckle to the pressure and try to join the crowd. She just stayed there, and people criticized her, but her state's in a way better state than all of the other 49 states. And that's because, and her state is just similar to Sweden right now. But when you have beta males in charge, they just go around following each other. And when they follow each other, they lead everybody into a ditch. It's just like the blind leading the blind, all fall into a ditch. And these guys have practically driven America into a ditch, because they can't do what men do, which is put aside their feelings, navigate through their emotions, and work for the better of everyone. They put goals first, they put people's needs first, and they leave their personal feelings at the door. And this is a big problem I'm seeing with many of our politicians and even some of our business owners. They're so caught up in Donald Trump that they can't really think rationally or critically, and they just practically are so emotional over this man. You mention his name and they practically lose it. And it shouldn't be that way about Donald Trump. I mean, if this man is the president and America voted for him, you need to accept that 4 years later and not use his name to just make excuses for your failures. I mean, a lot of these decisions, they were made by governors who have their power given to them by the 10th Amendment, and they have to take responsibility for their choices, and they can't put it all on Donald Trump. I mean, he only controls the interstate commerce, he controls the roads. He did not close any of those roads like some of the doctors tried to propose that he close off roads and interstate commerce, things people would need to get food and essential services. These are things that they want to blame him for. But the sad part is many Americans don't even know their own constitution, and they don't even know their own government. And that's really sad because I look at it and go, do you even know the three branches of government, which is executive, legislative, and judicial, the three branches of government? And do you know what the president has power over and what the Congress has power over? And what's sad is we have many of these, what they call SJWs, who sit there and talk all of this stuff about anti-Trump stuff. And you sit there and go, do you even know the three branches of government, which is a fourth grade concept? And do you even know the amendments of the United States Constitution and what they mean? Do you know any of this stuff? And the woke types will look at you and they just want to go into ad hominem attacks. But ad hominem attacks are something that, again, beta males do. Whenever you present facts, logic, and reason to them, they go into histrionics and ad hominem attacks because they cannot deal and process the facts. They want their reality to be reality. And that's one of the big problems when you deal with a beta male in a leadership position. He wants his reality to be the reality. He wants his facts to be the facts. Unfortunately, in the world of reality, you cannot manipulate your facts to be the facts. You cannot manipulate data to be what you want it to be. If something is what it is, you can't change it into something else. And that's what the blue pill beta male tries to do. He tries to make everything fit into his rose-colored reality. And that's another reason why you have, whenever you put them in leadership positions, they just completely fall apart. Because if there's a problem going on, you cannot just say, oh, that's something minor. No, you have to sit there and say, yes, this is going on. Yes, this is a problem. And yes, we're going to deal with that problem. And yes, we need to go out here and work on what needs to be done. That's what makes the difference between an alpha male and a beta male. The alpha male will sit there and say, yeah, I have a problem. And once he acknowledges the problem, he starts working towards the solution. The beta male, on the other hand, denies the problem, and the problem continues to get worse. And the problem is getting worse because he refuses to deal with the reality that is in front of him. And because he refuses to deal with reality, what happens is his whole life falls apart. And what's happening right now in America is falling apart. And it's falling apart because you have beta males in charge, and the beta males don't want to deal with the reality that's going on. And even some of the females don't want to deal with the reality. Because I remember looking at what happened in Seattle with the mayor there, and you have people building up this Chaz or CHOP empowerment zone. And her response is to say, oh, they're having a summer of love. And then when I heard her say that, I said to myself, this is the same type of behavior I talked about in the man crisis, about how these single mothers, when they're out here, they just, whenever they're running into one of these teenage sons who is giving them a hard time, what they do is they will just deny what's going on, tune everything out that doesn't give them positive information, and they will just sit there and just not even confront it because it's too overwhelming for them. And we saw that happen with that mayor of Seattle and her female police chief. They practically just shut down in the face of people taking over entire blocks of a neighborhood, terrorizing people, taking over a police station. I mean, leadership practically collapsed in front of us because these women weren't equipped. And the same thing with Bill de Blasio here in New York. He practically crumbled into dust during this pandemic, and he crumbled very quickly in many news conferences. And he also is crumbling right now because the situation on the Upper West Side is driving people out of New York City, the wealthiest and most affluent. They have taken their economic resources and moved out of the city. And his response is to ask those people to come back and beg them to come back. And when I looked at that, I said, you're coming from a position of weakness. I mean, you have to admit what you did wrong. You have to admit, okay, this approach I did, housing these homeless individuals inside of these hotels, has destroyed the quality of life for residents and is leading to residents moving out of New York City, and it's destroying my long-term tax base. But instead of doing that, we get denial. And again, this is a classic beta male trait. Whenever they run into something that's going wrong, they don't deal with the conflict by saying, okay, I made a mistake. Okay, this isn't working, and go in a different direction. No, the beta male, what they do is go out here and try to apply more of the same. And we also see that with the people talking about they want to shut down the country once again. And again, that's a beta male trait because beta males, whenever something fails, they want to do more of the same. Now, the definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. Unfortunately, the beta male never understands that his approach to things is insane. And he just thinks, oh, if I keep doing the exact same things, I will get a different result, not understanding that if something isn't working, then you need to stop doing it. And we see from the last 90 days, the shutdown hasn't worked, and we need to go in a different approach. What's going on, Chris? I'm glad to see you here. I already promoted Omega Black's Indiegogo, and I'm going to promote it again. So the Omega Black Indiegogo is at 50%, over 50%, and I want to get it over to 100. I mean, we're in the first week of the Indiegogo, and we're at 54% right now. So let's put in the pledges and help get Chris over to 100% because we can do it and then get it to the stretch goal. So let's try to get that going. And I'm going to get back to my topic. And yeah, I mean, yeah, Kai makes a good point. Yeah, those rich residents aren't going to return to a rundown area, and they're not going to return to an area filled with individuals that are urinating, defecating, masturbating. And what's really scary is you had pedophiles in this area, and one of them is near a public school. The quality of life, again, has gone down to ghetto levels of the 1970s, and the mayor's response is just to look like this. I mean, that's denial, and you have to admit, okay, I made a mistake, and I need to correct the mistake. And I need to get these individuals out of this prime real estate before they drop the values down to Section 8 levels and they start redlining the area. That's what a leader is going to do, because the leader understands that if you're losing your richest taxpayers, you're in a bad situation, and you'll be in a worse situation once the pandemic is over, because those people aren't coming back. Those people will sit there and say, look, why would I want to go back to a filthy city filled with criminals and crime escalating back up to 1970s levels? This is something that people would look at and go, look, I don't want to come back here, and I shouldn't have let it get to this point. But again, a beta male he's so used to chaos because he just tunes it out, because that's another beta male trait, is just tuning things out. They will just sit there. You will explain to them, okay, you're having a problem here, but when you put him in a leadership position, he just tunes out any sort of bad information instead of coming up with a plan to solve the problem. This is one of the essential reasons why you should never put a beta male in a management position or a leadership position, because whenever there's a problem, he just shuts off. I mean, you'll sit there and you'll be talking to the beta male, and what will happen is he will just not even acknowledge you. I mean, I've seen this even when I talk to beta males, and they will just sit there. You'll be thinking that you're talking and they're not listening. And the same thing with many female leaders. They will, when you start talking to them, they just are sitting there with this blank look on their face. They don't want to hear anything you're saying. It's like they don't want to process this because it's information they don't want to hear. So they shut their brains off to it. And then once you start talking about something else, they turn their brains back on. And that's a very, very dangerous situation to put a person in a leadership position, because this kind of guy, if he tunes out as related to conflict, he's going to cost people their lives. I mean, and that's what's happening right now. You have the tune outs as related to all of the crime going on. You have the tune outs as related to all of the deaths from COVID-19. And tuning out is a dangerous thing, because when you tune out, it means you're not listening to what's going on. And in some cases, you don't even care. And this is, again, why you don't put a beta male in a leadership position, because when he's in a leadership position, he is not going to want to deal with the problem and work on a solution, because he's taking everything personally and not trying to be professional. And this is one of the other big problems with beta males and even some females in leadership positions. Everything is about them, but they don't understand that everything is not about how you look. It's about how you take care of business and how you solve the problem. That's what you were hired to do when you become a manager. A manager's job is to solve problems, and then once they solve the problem, put a period at the end of things and move on to the next goal. And the other big problem I see with this beta male leadership is they don't know how to put a period at the end of things. And that's really one of the things that's keeping this pandemic in a really bad place, is that people don't know when to put a period at the end of things after you finish one goal and move to the next. Because the beta male leadership, once you finish a goal, they don't want to be responsible for anything or have any sort of assessment of how things are measured. What they do is, this isn't finished yet. This isn't finished yet. It's like their insecurities overwhelm them. And because their insecurities overwhelm them, they don't want to get that measure, and they don't want to move on. And they want to remain in the same spot over and over again, because that's how they get their attention. And they like using the position of the victim because they believe it's a position of power. And I'm seeing that with this pandemic. You see a lot of these politicians and leaders using the pandemic as like a victim position to bludgeon people. They keep talking about the deaths. They keep talking about how things are so bad, but they don't also talk about other things like recovery, and they don't focus on solutions as to getting the healthy back to a place where they can function once more. Everything is about the problem and everything is about being the victim. But a healthy man or a healthy woman, they're going to sit there and say, look, yes, we have this problem. We're going to work towards solving this problem, and then we're going to move towards the next goal. But when you have a beta male leader, he'll stay in one place and he won't move on. And that prevents things from moving forward, and it prevents things from growing. And he doesn't want to deal with any sort of problem, because it means he can't be the center of attention. And that's one of the other things with beta males is that when they're in a leadership position, everything is about them being that center of attention. And when they're the center of attention, they love that spotlight, but they're not understanding that you're in the spotlight because you're supposed to be here because you want to care about others and care for the needs of others. Thank you, Born Savior, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I sad to see the Upper West Side turned into that 1989 type ghetto. I mean, yeah, I saw the movie Cyborg with Jean-Claude Van Damme, but it's looking like when I was a kid back in the 80s, I mean, it was a war zone. And when you remember, if you were to have grown up in the 90s and remember how Rudy Giuliani practically cleaned up all these areas and turned these areas into $1 million properties and practically turned these areas in New York into gems. I mean, he practically cleaned all this up. And in less than 4 years, Bill de Blasio has turned it into a ghetto. And in less than 6 months, he's practically turned the Upper West Side into, I call it where I used to live, Park Avenue in the Bronx. I mean, he's turned it into a wasteland. And one of the things that I found to be very interesting was when I looked at the picture on the New York Post, it said of these homeless black men, you notice there was no social distancing and nobody was going to make these guys social distance. I mean, here you have, again, a situation where you have germs, filth, bacteria, and you have ripe for spread of virus and disease during a pandemic. You have people, again, urinating, defecating, bodily fluids being spread out, and you have no social distancing, and you have this type of squalor. And if we don't do anything about the evictions, we're going to see more of this squalor, and the squalor is going to lead to more COVID-19. Would I ever leave New York City? Yeah, if I had enough money. I mean, if I had the money, I would leave New York City. Brother, I would leave, but I don't know where I would go because I can't drive just yet. I need a driver's license, but yeah, it's not as far side of the fan. Yeah, it's not as crummy as it used to be, but if you lived there in the 80s, and I lived there in the 80s, Park Avenue in the Bronx was not pretty. I mean, it was really rough over there, especially near the Metro North Railroad tracks. That's where I used to live. And it was pretty bad back in the day. And this is what Bill de Blasio has turned New York into because he's a beta male. And again, beta males, they just don't want to acknowledge filth. They don't want to acknowledge squalor. They don't want to acknowledge that things are in decline. They just don't want to say, hey, this is messed up. I need to do something about this. I mean, any other male is going to say, look, I have a standard for how I do things. I have a standard for how I live. But a beta male, another reason why you don't want to put him in a leadership position is because he has no standards. He'll just take whatever people put in front of him, and he won't go out here and say, look, this needs to be up to a certain level. And if I'm going to bring this out here, things need to be to a certain level if we're going to have a way of life. And this is another reason why you don't hire beta males to be your managers. This is why you don't put beta males in leadership positions. This is why you don't elect beta males, is that they have no standards. And when you don't have a standard, you don't have anything to measure anything by. I mean, when you have a standard, you have something to measure things by. You have a set of guidelines for how things are supposed to be. And you have a rigid set of standards as related to things, as related to cleanliness, sanitation, and how things are supposed to be presented. And you need those things in order to have a functioning civilization. Unfortunately, when you have a beta male in charge, he doesn't have any sort of standard. And that's why everything just goes to ruin under beta male leadership. And you have to really sit down and say to yourself, I would rather take I would rather take a sigma male or an alpha male, but I don't want to take a beta male as a leader because he will just drop the bar down into the ground, and there won't be any measure because he's afraid of criticism and he's afraid of accountability because he knows as long as that bar is there, he has to meet that bar, and he doesn't want to meet that bar because he's scared of criticism. And it just shows, again, the weakness of your beta male, and it shows why he should not be in a leadership position. And when he's in a leadership position, you don't get any sort of synergy, you don't get any sort of functionality. Anything that he runs turns into chaos, and anything that he runs winds up being a complete wreck because he's not really thinking about maintaining any sort of standard. He's not thinking about establishing any sort of goals, and he's not thinking about building anything up. All he's thinking about is having his smooth world, taking care of his friends, and having a good time. As long as he and his have theirs, they have the I got mine, F you mentality. And as long as they've got theirs, everything is okay, even though everything is falling apart all around them. So when you put a beta male in a leadership position, you don't get things taken care of. You don't get business taken care of because these males don't know how to be men. These males don't know how to work like a man. These males don't know how to think like a man. They don't know how to problem solve like a man. They don't know how to think critically like a man. And the ultimate thing is these guys don't know how to do anything long term. Everything with them is short term. Everything with them is quick fix. And everything with them is about what I can get now. And they never think about the consequences later. And that's what makes having a beta male around a liability, because they really don't think about anything as to later or the consequences of it. And sadly, we see during this pandemic, because these guys thought short term, they have done great damage long term. And our economy will suffer for years, and our infrastructure is going to suffer for years because we, the people, don't understand how dangerous beta males are. And we don't understand how the man crisis has not only affected everyday men in a regular house, they've affected men in the State House, the White House, and the Congress and the Senate. And when you have beta males in leadership positions, beta males don't know how to create a civil situation. All beta males know how to do is create chaos. And Jay Stevens says, in modern day media, TV shows and cartoons, there are no alpha male characters. Well, I go into that in The Man Crisis. They've stripped all the male characters of their alpha tendencies because the feminists did not want to see strong masculine men in media. They thought that those images were sexist. So we saw a devolution of the male, starting with the movie Mr. Mom, where that Michael Keaton played this emasculated male. And we also start to happen in TV shows like your Who's the Boss, where he was a beta male. And we started to see it happen with Married with Children, with the emasculation of Al Bundy, even though he was still trying to push back against it later on. And we started to see it happen with Homer Simpson, this emasculation of the male, the demonization of the male. And we started to see it with shows like Friends, where we saw Ross, who was a beta male. We saw it with Ray Romano, and we saw it with King of Queens. And we definitely saw it on the Drew Carey show. We just saw this devaluation of the man. And it got to the point where we got to the Charlie Harper, Peter Griffin, stupid male. So we're not seeing models for actual manhood anymore on television. Instead, we get this elevated, hyper feminine superwoman who can do everything. And we get this stupid, incompetent male. And sadly, men aren't pushing back against these type of images, which present us in a negative light and present us as a joke. We think it's funny, but our kids are sitting there watching this, especially young boys, and they're thinking that this model for manhood is one they should follow, but it's not one they should follow because no one wants a weak man, and societies can't function when you present us with weak images of masculinity and manhood, because when you have weak males in charge of a civilization, that civilization is going to fall apart. And we see this happening right now because when you look at things right now, you have these weak males, and these weak males, they're just crumbling and falling apart around us. I mean, they're just falling apart in the face of this pandemic. And when you look at them and listen to them, it's really sad um, to see that people can't connect dots and see, okay, there's a problem here with the way men are being presented. And now we have a man crisis going on as related to real world situations. Men are not really stepping up to the plate. Men really aren't trying to focus on goals. We have men instead going into back and forths in our White House. We have men and going back and forth in our state houses. And we have men crumbling, like we had the mayor of Minneapolis practically running away from loud black women in the George Floyd riots. I mean, these are images of weakness, and these are images that show us, again, that we have a problem with male leadership as related to our society. And it's a real problem when you don't have good, strong male leadership, because if you don't have male leadership, there's nobody there to set a tone, nobody there to set a direction, nobody there to set a course, and nobody there to set structure and order, because without these elements, you're going to get chaos and havoc. And it takes a man who understands how to be a man in order to navigate that, set that course, navigate that course, and lead people. Because when you have a beta male, he likes the accolades, he likes the fame, he likes the glory, but he doesn't understand that what makes people who revel someone is the fact that they respect them. And the reason why they respect that person is because that person has the confidence to stand up for what they believe in, the integrity to continue standing for what they want to do, and they have the integrity, discipline, and resolve to persevere in the face of adversity. And they always push no matter what, because they understand that it's not about them, it's about the people they're serving. And that's another problem with the beta male. It's all about him and what he wants, and not about others. And that's the problem with our leadership today, is they're all about themselves, and they want to be big shots. But we need leaders who can lead, and these guys are not fit for leadership. They're not fit for duty. Yes, many of them are popular and many of them can talk a good game, but they cannot go out here and stand in the face of adversity, and they cannot stand during a crisis. So when you have beta males put in positions of power, it's a very, very serious thing. And any boss out here needs to think about this. The American people need to think about it. If you have the wrong person in a leadership position, it can practically destroy a business. And in the case of America, it looks like our country is in a really bad place, because we, the people, don't understand how important it is to put the right person in a leadership role, because the right person can mean the difference between life and death in a dire situation. So I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, because it was a little late. I had a situation I had to take care of, but I really want to thank everybody for coming out tonight to tonight's stream. And I would really appreciate it if you guys would donate to the Cash App so that I can continue doing live streams and shows and making videos. That helps a lot. And I also need people to donate to the Patreon, because that's how I pay for projects like the Easting No Good Deed comic strip and covers for books like ISIS, The Main Event, which is available on Amazon.com, and books like John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose, which just got another 5-star review. So these are books people are liking. These are the 2020 catalog. And you can also pick up The Temptation of John Haynes on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. And you can find all of my books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. I mean, I have over 75 books there. So you get all my books there, like John Haynes, The Man with Nothing to Lose. You can get The Man Crisis on Amazon as well. And The Man Crisis will go deeply in depth on beta males. And it's a book that will really show you why it's bad, why beta males are bad. And it's a book that will that's transformed many men's lives. So you definitely want to pick it up. It's a book that will change your life and open up your life. And you also would want to pick up Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming out to tonight's stream, and I hope you'll be there for next week's stream. I'm going to take a minute. Universal Black X, would this include the donors of charter schools leaving New York City? Yeah, it would be them too, because they're leaving too. And Born Savior said, yeah, he was caught in a beta male crossfire between his beta manager who gave orders to supervise. Oh, that's a horrible situation. And because these guys, again, they don't want to deal with conflict. I had a beta male manager, and it was one of the worst experiences I ever had. These guys are a real nightmare to deal with. And it's really sad that the country is surrounded with beta males, and they are participating in the same type of chaos on the political level as well. And America really needs to wake up to these beta males and the man crisis, because if we have a man crisis in politics, it's going to do damage to our country as related to policy and as related to our economy. All right, I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. And again, I hope you'll be there for next week's stream.